The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of the Roman Forum, as Marcus Tullius, a young historian from Gaul, made his way through the bustling marketplace. The year was 98 AD, and Emperor Trajan's reign had brought prosperity to the Eternal City. Marcus clutched a worn scroll containing his grandfather's writings about Roman customs, but one particular observation puzzled him deeply. Why did Romans despise long beards with such fervor? If you've ever wondered about the hidden secrets of ancient civilizations, you're about to discover something that will change how you see Roman culture forever. As Marcus navigated through the crowd, he couldn't help but notice the stark uniformity among Roman citizens. Every man was meticulously clean-shaven or bore only the shortest of stubble. Even the marble statues of emperors and senators displayed smooth, hairless faces that gleamed in the Mediterranean light. This wasn't mere fashion. It was something deeper, more profound. The young scholar approached Gaius Antonius, a respected senator known for his knowledge of Roman traditions. The elderly man's face, weathered by years of public service, was as smooth as polished marble despite his advanced age. "Senator Antonius," Marcus began respectfully, "I seek to understand our customs. Why do we Romans shave our faces with such dedication, when other peoples, the Greeks, the Gauls, the Germans, wear their beards with pride?" The senator's eyes narrowed slightly, and he gestured for Marcus to follow him away from the crowded forum. "Young man from Gaul," he said in a measured tone, "you ask about something that strikes at the very heart of what it means to be Roman. Walk with me to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, and I will show you something that will illuminate this mystery." As they climbed the steps of the Capitoline Hill, Senator Antonius explained the practical beginnings of Roman shaving culture. "It began with military necessity," he said, his voice carrying the weight of tradition. "A soldier with a long beard gives his enemy something to grab in close combat. But what started as military practicality became something much more significant." The senator paused before a magnificent statue of Jupiter, the king of the Roman gods. Unlike the bearded Zeus of the Greeks, this Jupiter was depicted with a clean-shaven face, his divine features unmarked by facial hair. "Notice, young Marcus, how our greatest god appears. The Greeks may worship a bearded Zeus, but we Romans understand that divinity requires refinement." Marcus studied the statue intently, beginning to grasp the deeper implications. In Roman society, the clean-shaven face represented more than grooming. It symbolized civilization itself, the triumph of culture over nature, of order over chaos. "But there's more," the senator continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The real reason runs deeper than military strategy or divine representation. It touches upon our most sacred beliefs about purity, about what separates us from the barbarians who threaten our borders." As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the 7 hills of Rome, Marcus realized he was about to uncover a truth that would challenge everything he thought he knew about Roman identity. The clean-shaven faces around him weren't just following a trend. They were participating in a ritual as old as the empire itself. The senator's final words that day would echo in Marcus's mind for weeks to come. "Tomorrow, meet me at the baths of Agrippa at the 6th hour. There you will witness the sacred ritual that binds every Roman man to his divine duty. And perhaps then you will understand why a beard is not merely hair, but a symbol of everything we Romans have sworn to reject." The ritual that Senator Antonius spoke of would prove to be more shocking and profound than Marcus could ever imagine, revealing a religious practice that shaped the very soul of Roman civilization. The massive columns of the Baths of Agrippa rose like titans against the Roman sky as Marcus arrived at the appointed hour. The sound of splashing water and animated conversation filled the air, but underneath it all was a rhythmic scraping sound that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the city itself. Senator Antonius was waiting, already dressed in the simple tunic worn by bathers. "Come, Marcus," he said, leading the way into the complex. "Today you will witness the daily ritual that every Roman citizen performs, not merely for appearance, but for the purity of his soul." And inside the caldarium, the hot room filled with steam, dozens of Roman men sat on marble benches, while skilled slaves worked over them with bronze razors and strigils. The air was thick with the scent of olive oil and the sharp tang of metal on skin. But what struck Marcus most profoundly was the reverent silence with which each man approached this daily ritual. "Observe carefully," the senator whispered as they watched a young patrician prepare for his shave. "See how he purifies himself with water first, then applies the sacred oils. This is not mere grooming. It is a religious act." Marcus watched in fascination as the barber began his work. Each stroke of the bronze razor was precise, methodical, almost ceremonial. The patrician's eyes were closed, his lips moving in what appeared to be silent prayer. "What is he saying?" Marcus asked. "He recites the ancient formula," Senator Antonius replied. "A prayer to Mars and Jupiter, asking them to cleanse not just his face, but his Roman spirit. You see, young scholar, we believe that facial hair connects us to our animal nature, to the wild and untamed forces that civilization must conquer." An elderly man nearby, his weathered hands steady despite his age, overheard their conversation. "I am Lucius Septimius," he introduced himself, "a veteran of the Germanic campaigns. I have seen what lies beyond our borders, the long-bearded barbarians who live like beasts, who know nothing of law or order or the favor of the gods." Lucius gestured to his own immaculately shaven face. "When I returned from those campaigns, I understood for the first time why we perform this ritual. The barbarians we fought, the Germanic tribes, the Gauls who still resist our ways, they wear their beards long and wild because they remain slaves to nature. We Romans have transcended such primitive bonds." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. A man with a distinctly foreign appearance, olive skin, dark eyes, and most shocking of all, a full beard reaching nearly to his chest, had entered the baths. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Conversation stopped. Eyes turned. The very air seemed to grow heavy with tension. "A Jew," Senator Antonius murmured, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and distaste. "One of those who refuse to honor our customs, who cling to their foreign god and their barbarous practices." Marcus watched as the bearded man made his way through the baths, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispered comments that followed in his wake. Roman citizens instinctively moved away from him, creating an invisible barrier that spoke louder than words. "You see now," the senator continued, "why the question of beards touches the very core of Roman identity. To us, a long beard represents not just foreign customs, but foreign gods. The Jews, the Christians, the followers of Oriental mystery cults, they all reject our civilized practices in favor of their primitive beliefs." Lucius nodded grimly. "In the legions, we could always identify the unreliable auxiliaries, the ones whose loyalty to Rome remained questionable. They were the ones who struggled most with our grooming standards. A man who cannot discipline his own face cannot be trusted to discipline his sword arm." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus began to understand the deeper theological implications of what he was witnessing. The daily shaving ritual wasn't just about appearance or military practicality. It was a daily affirmation of Roman religious and cultural superiority. "The gods themselves show us the way," Senator Antonius explained as they prepared to leave the baths. "Jupiter, Mars, Apollo, all the divine patrons of Rome appear to us clean-shaven in their temples and statues. Only the gods of chaos and barbarism, the foreign deities that threaten our order, are depicted with wild, untamed beards." As they walked back through the forum in the evening light, Marcus noticed something he had never observed before: the careful attention every Roman paid to the faces around them. A clean-shaven face was a passport to respectability, a visible sign of belonging to the greatest civilization the world had ever known. But Marcus was about to discover that this obsession with facial hair ran even deeper than religious purity. It was connected to the very survival of the Roman Empire itself and the growing threat that bearded foreigners posed to everything Romans held sacred. 3 days after his revelation at the baths, Marcus found himself in the Subura, Rome's most densely populated district, where the narrow streets teemed with merchants, slaves, and foreigners from every corner of the empire. The contrast with the pristine forum was stark. Here, among the crowded insulae and bustling workshops, the rigid rules of Roman society seemed to bend and blur. Senator Antonius had arranged this expedition with a specific purpose. "If you truly wish to understand why Romans fear the beard," he had told Marcus, "you must see what happens when our customs clash with those who refuse to abandon their foreign ways." They paused outside a small building marked with strange symbols. A Christian house church, one of many that had begun appearing throughout the city despite official disapproval. Through the partially open door, Marcus could hear voices raised in prayer, speaking in accented Latin mixed with Greek and Aramaic. "Listen carefully," the senator whispered. "Do you hear how they speak? These Christians, these Jews, these followers of Oriental mystery cults, they bring not just their foreign gods, but their foreign appearance, and with it, they challenge everything that makes Rome great." A group of men emerged from the building, and Marcus was struck by the sight. Several wore full beards in the style of Jewish rabbis or Christian presbyters. Their faces, framed by dark hair, seemed to carry an intensity that made the clean-shaven Romans around them appear almost pale and lifeless by comparison. "Cornelius!" Senator Antonius called out to a man Marcus recognized as a fellow senator. Cornelius approached them, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "Antonius, thank the gods you're here," Cornelius said, glancing nervously at the Christian gathering. "The situation grows more troublesome each day. These bearded cultists multiply like plague rats, and with them comes sedition and disorder." Marcus watched as a Roman patrol approached the Christian group. The leader, a centurion with the weathered face of a career soldier, spoke in clipped, authoritative tones. "You there with the beard, state your business in this district." The bearded man, who appeared to be a Christian leader, replied calmly, "We gather to worship the one true God, as is our right under Roman law." The tension was palpable. Marcus could see how the centurion's hand instinctively moved toward his gladius, how the other soldiers shifted their stance. But it wasn't just the man's words that triggered this reaction, it was his appearance. The long, untrimmed beard marked him as fundamentally other, as someone who rejected the most basic tenets of Roman civilization. "Your right," the centurion spat, "exists only as long as you don't threaten Roman order. And that beard of yours is a daily insult to Roman customs." Senator Antonius pulled Marcus aside as the confrontation continued. "Now you begin to see the real danger," he said in a low voice. "It's not just about grooming or religious preference. These bearded foreigners represent the breakdown of everything that has made Rome the master of the world." They moved to a nearby tavern, where Antonius had arranged to meet with Marcus Aurelius Scripta, a respected historian and advisor to the imperial court. Scripta, a thin man with intelligent eyes and the characteristic smooth cheeks of Roman nobility, had spent years studying the empire's borders and the threats that lay beyond them. "The beard question," Scripta began without preamble, "is fundamentally a question of loyalty. When we see a Roman citizen, or someone claiming to be one, sporting a full beard in the manner of barbarians, we must ask, where do his true allegiances lie? He produced a scroll containing reports from various provincial governors. Look at these accounts from Germania, from Britannia, from Dacia. In every case where Roman authority has been challenged, where rebellion has festered, you will find the same pattern. Local leaders who adopt barbarian customs, including their unkempt facial hair. Marcus studied the documents, noting the recurring themes. Germanic chieftains with flowing beards leading revolts against Roman taxation. British druids whose wild appearance matched their rejection of Roman law. Dacian nobles who grew their beards long as a sign of resistance to imperial authority. But surely, Marcus ventured, a man's facial hair cannot determine his loyalty to Rome. Scripta's laugh was bitter. Can it not? Tell me, young scholar, what message does a man send when he deliberately chooses to appear like Rome's enemies, when he adopts the grooming habits of those who would destroy our civilization? As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion erupted outside the tavern. A crowd had gathered around a public notice board where a new imperial decree was being posted. The three men hurried outside to see what had caused such excitement. The decree, bearing the seal of Emperor Trajan himself, was clear and uncompromising. Let it be known that any man seeking advancement in the imperial service, whether military or civilian, must maintain the appearance befitting a Roman citizen. Foreign customs in dress or grooming will be considered evidence of divided loyalty and will result in exclusion from public office. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Clean-shaven citizens nodded approvingly, while the few bearded foreigners present seemed to shrink back into the shadows. "You see," Senator Antonius said to Marcus, "this is not the whim of fashion or the prejudice of narrow minds. This is imperial policy designed to preserve the very foundations of our empire." As they walked home through the darkening streets, Marcus reflected on what he had witnessed. The beard, he now understood, had become a symbol far more powerful than he had ever imagined. It represented not just religious differences or cultural preferences, but a fundamental choice between civilization and barbarism, between Roman order and foreign chaos. Yet Marcus was about to discover that this cultural war over facial hair would soon face its greatest test. A challenge that would shake the very foundations of Roman society and force the empire to confront the limits of its own power. The morning that would change Marcus's understanding forever began with an urgent summons to the Palatine Hill. Emperor Trajan himself had requested the presence of selected scholars and senators to discuss what palace officials cryptically described as the bearded crisis. As Marcus climbed the marble steps of the imperial palace, he reflected on how much his perspective had changed since that first conversation with Senator Antonius. What had begun as simple curiosity about Roman grooming habits had revealed itself as a fundamental aspect of imperial ideology, a daily ritual that reinforced Roman identity and divine favor. The assembled group in the emperor's private study was impressive. Senators, philosophers, priests from the major temples, and military commanders fresh from the Germanic and Dacian frontiers. At the center sat Trajan himself, his famously clean-shaven face bearing the weight of imperial responsibility. "Gentlemen," the emperor began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power, "we face a challenge that strikes at the heart of Roman civilization. Reports from across the empire indicate a growing movement of bearded dissidents who not only reject our customs, but actively encourage others to do the same." Marcus watched as Trajan gestured to a map spread across a marble table. Red markers indicated trouble spots across the empire, from the Christian communities in Antioch to the Jewish settlements in Alexandria, from the Germanic tribes beyond the Rhine to the mystery cults spreading throughout Asia Minor. "These bearded rebels," Trajan continued, "claim to serve gods more powerful than Jupiter himself. They speak of a coming kingdom that will sweep away Roman law and Roman order. and they mark themselves with the very symbol that our ancestors recognized as the sign of barbarism, the untamed beard. Gaius Pliny, the famous naturalist and imperial advisor, stood to address the assembly. "Caesar, my investigations have revealed the theological basis for this rebellion. These foreign cults teach that their gods demand natural appearance, that shaving the face is an insult to divine creation. They see our daily ritual of purification as an act of impiety." The implications were staggering. Marcus had thought the beard question was about cultural superiority and military practicality. Now he understood it was about competing claims to divine authority. "The Christians are particularly dangerous," reported Tacitus, the historian whose works on Germania had made him an expert on barbarian customs. "They teach that their God created man in his own image, and that image, according to them, includes facial hair. They claim that by shaving we Romans mutilate the divine form." Emperor Trajan's expression darkened. "And what do our own priests say to this blasphemy?" The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's highest religious authority, stepped forward. His ancient face, smooth despite his advanced years, carried the gravitas of centuries of tradition. "Caesar, the auguries are clear. The gods of Rome have always shown themselves to us clean-shaven in their temples and statues. Jupiter himself appears to us without beard, as do Mars, Apollo, and all the divine patrons of our empire." He paused, letting the weight of religious authority settle over the assembly. "More importantly, our sacred texts reveal that the act of shaving is itself a form of sacrifice, a daily offering to the gods that purifies the Roman spirit and maintains our divine favor. To abandon this practice would be to invite the wrath of heaven itself." Marcus watched, fascinated, as the emperor and his advisors discussed the practical implications of this theological crisis. It wasn't enough to simply prefer clean-shaven faces. The empire now faced organized religious opposition to what Romans considered a sacred duty. "The barbarians beyond our borders have always been our enemies," declared General Lucius Quietus, whose campaigns in Mesopotamia had brought him face to face with bearded Persian priests and Arab chieftains. "But now the enemy is within our gates. These bearded cultists spread their foreign superstitions among our own citizens, teaching them to reject the customs that have made Rome great." The emperor stood and walked to a window overlooking the Forum, where thousands of clean-shaven Roman citizens went about their daily business. "The solution," he said finally, "must be as comprehensive as the threat. We will not merely discourage foreign customs, we will actively promote Roman ones." Trajan turned back to the assembly, his decision made. "Let it be decreed that all Roman citizens must demonstrate their loyalty through proper grooming. Public barbers will be subsidized by the state. Shaving will become a civic duty, as important as military service or tax payment." The Pontifex Maximus nodded approvingly. "And let the temples be instructed to emphasize the religious significance of this practice. Every Roman must understand that his daily shave is an act of worship, a renewal of his covenant with the gods of Rome." As the meeting concluded, Marcus found himself walking through the Forum with a new understanding of the crowds around him. Every clean-shaven face he saw was making a statement, not just about personal grooming, but about religious loyalty, cultural identity, and political allegiance. Senator Antonius joined him as they descended the Palatine Hill. "Now you understand, young scholar, why your grandfather's writings treated this matter with such seriousness. The beard question is not about fashion or military convenience. It is about the survival of Roman civilization itself." As Marcus looked out over the eternal city, watching the sun set behind the 7 hills where Roman power had first taken root, he realized that the daily ritual of shaving had become more than a custom. It was a declaration of war against the forces that would destroy everything Rome represented. The evening light caught the marble faces of countless statues throughout the Forum, Gods and emperors, senators and heroes, all bearing the smooth, clean-shaven visage that had become the mark of Roman divine favor. In the growing shadows, Marcus understood that this was more than history. It was the story of how an empire used the simplest of rituals to define the very essence of civilization itself. The incredible truth about Roman beards reveals how the smallest cultural practices can become the strongest bonds holding a civilization together, and how the challenge to those practices can threaten the very foundations of power itself.